Hello, hello everybody. I'm Thanos Yamas. I'm going to moderate this discussion regarding digital rights management and digital blockchain. I have three uh, friends actually already. We met only a day before, a few hours ago. Panos, I know him a long time ago. But we have a very interesting discussion already outside. I hope we can repeat it here as well. Usually the best discussions are outside, as we said. We have Tor, we have Yanis, and we have Panos. I would like you to ask just with a short intro of yourself, and in the process we'll move to the topic. Okay, Tor.
I'm Tor Peterson, the co-founder of Internet Music and the Internet Music ecosystem, and the cryptocurrency copyright coins. We are one of the few, or if not the only one, that are approaching the problem of the music industry top-side down. That is, we are starting with the popular music that represent the high earners, that represent 95% of the turnover. And the only way we can do that is by utilizing blockchain and or cryptocurrency copyright coins, which, by the way, is the first regulated cryptocurrency in European Union out of Estonia.
Hello everyone, my name is Yanis Levantes. You probably saw me briefly yesterday when I was being the beautiful presenter on the stage. I'm probably the outlier in the group. I don't come from a music background, I come from the industry. So I've worked in large corporations like Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline, Rolls-Royce Aerospace. Always in senior technology roles, managing extensive business transformation, multi-million, multi-year pound business transformation programs. And my latest role was Group CIO for a 3 billion revenue manufacturing business in London. All my career has been in England. So currently I don't represent a particular company, I represent myself. But I do have a great interest in this topic, both from a personal perspective, but also from a professional perspective, because it very much relates, when you look at it from my lens, it's very much around adoption. And adoption from a wider consumer audience, which is probably one of the fundamental problems in violating rights management or piracy or whatever, is very much actually similar to how solutions and all kinds of innovation gets or does not get adopted in large enterprises.
Hello everyone, my name is Panos Panay. I'm originally from Cyprus, born and raised here. I've been in America for the last 26 years. I'm currently Vice President for Innovation and Strategy at the Berklee College of Music. And since about a year and a half ago, we launched an initiative called the Open Music Initiative in collaboration with the MIT Media Lab. And our objective is to create an open protocol for the uniform identification of rights owners. And whereas we're not mandating blockchain in the protocol, it is by and large the primary technology that a lot of the companies that belong to the initiative are using. Open Music has over 200 members right now. These involve all three of the major music labels, so that is Sony, Warner, Universal, almost every single one of the streaming services, including Spotify, Pandora, SoundCloud, YouTube, and maybe about 100 blockchain startups are part of the initiative. Also companies like Netflix, Intel, Viacom. And just to paint a bit of a picture very quickly for the people who are not very familiar with the intricacy of music copyright, I'm not going to go too much into that, but consider this. An average global hit, so take a Taylor Swift song, or you name any artist that's popular right now, could have as many as 700,000 different revenue lines, different ways of making money, especially as a hit becomes more and more popular in different regions and different countries. At the same time, there could be as many as 50 different intermediaries between the person that produced the music and the consumer. So as you can imagine, between this and the fact that the industry's architecture is mostly based on constructs that were developed in the late 1800s, coupled with the new ways that music is being consumed and also the ways that music is being made, has created an enormous mess. So with the initiative, which we've been spearheading, purely because we believe that fundamentally a better ecosystem for the music industry is a better ecosystem for us as an academic institution. We believe that these new technologies can have a profound impact with respect to simplifying the way that money flows directly to creators. So while we're having this discussion, even though we're going to talk about music, at its core, these are issues that you've been talking about for the last 2 days. Issues of authentication of identity, issues of provenance, issues of ultimately who owns what, and data privacy. And I'll conclude by saying that the reason why we've been able to get these people together, many of whom are suing each other, so if you probably don't know a lot about the music industry, but you probably know that they're suing each other, largely has been based on this very concept that you're not creating a centralized clearinghouse for rights ownership, something that was attempted many times, including one failed attempt about a few years ago that cost 30 million euro. But the fact that this is decentralized and that you're not creating a new centralized clearinghouse has catalyzed the various people to come together.
Okay, so music practically has been converted into data nowadays. Okay, it is digital. And let's see some facts. The music industry as a whole, the previous 15 years experienced a huge decline. For a turnover of 45, 50 million, ended up to go 2014 in 15 billion, okay, dollars. The last 2 years, we see a kind of a change. Also, together with Panos, a few months ago, and some of his colleagues in OMI, we tried to map the value chain, the supply chain. It was a complete house. I mean, the graph was, let's say, like a surrealistic picture. So in this environment, and Yannis talked about adaptation, how do you see the day after, and how do you see your role? How do you, what is going to be the game changer according to you?
Well, there are two different entities in the music industry. The creators, if you like, the composers and the text writers, and the artists. The text writers and the composers are represented by publishing industry and musical works, as it's called. And the artists are in recording copyright. Now, the problem with all this, as you said, is that it's totally out of date. And a lot of the metadata in the system that tells who owns what, and consequently how they are getting paid their royalties, are way everywhere. There is a black box of royalties worth year on year $7 billion out there that has no owners. If anybody seen the movie Looking for Sugar Man, it's looking for Sugar Man on steroids out there. And as you said, there are a lot of middlemen with their hands very, very deep in that black box. So we are approaching this only from a digital point of view, an online digital. We are not involving ourselves in the physical or the mechanical part of this, because that's a total different mess. And we are calling it music as a service. Whomever, like Spotify or Apple Music, wants to license a song for the duration of 3.5 minutes can do so on a pay-as-you-go basis or on a monthly basis or whatever in a music as a service. Fully licensed and through internet music as a non-profit organization. So that's where we started, and we are starting with the 300 copyright owners out there who at the moment are the most popular in the world, representing 95% of the turnover in the music industry.
Okay. Panos, what do you think about this game-changing process?
I mean,
Because Tori is giving us an example from inside, how they affect
I have a few thoughts. I mean, yes, monetization of music has declined tremendously over the last 18 years. Yes, it started coming up again, which tells me that the industry is beginning to develop a model to monetize the digitization of its asset, unlike other industries, which are still probably about to go through even deeper disruption. But at the same time, as the decline of revenue, you've had a proliferation of consumption of music. So I would argue that there's more music being consumed in more places by more people in more ways than ever before in the entire history of humankind, and certainly in the entire history of the commercial music industry. Now, what's happened is that the pendulum swung away from the creators and the companies that are funding creators, let's call them labels and other assorted entities, to largely distributors of content. And these are the big companies that we know that are collectively worth several $1 trillion and are the top 5 listed companies in the US stock exchange, right? So Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. I think the opportunity here through a concerted effort is for that pendulum to swing a bit back and put more control into the hands of the creator. Now, our view as an initiative is twofold. First, we are not mandating specific implementations. So we are not here to say this particular company or this particular implementation is what will be the standard. We're here to create an open standard similar to TCP/IP or SMTP or any number of other standards. And we believe that the market will ultimately determine which is the implementation or implementations that will succeed. So with the blockchain startups, maybe some of them will specialize in different areas and they'll become the market leader in that. But our view is that we're still probably 5 or 6 years on a minimum away from commercial grade implementations of this technology within this industry. We're very closely aligned with Intel's Sawtooth Lake platform. So over the summer, we've had a number of prototype implementations. But you're talking about an industry that's handling, trillions and trillions of transactions that are all, fractions of a penny. So I think we're still some years behind. You see commercial grade applications.
In your vision, and talking about this restructuring and the new protocol, etc., where the artist really lies. I mean, as you said, there is already an increase in the revenues the last 2 years, but that has affected the reimbursement of the artists already, or it is just a new number of, and the artist is still there with
there's a complete realignment of what we call the music industry and who the players are. And chances are the players of yesterday, which are the major record labels, they probably won't continue to have that dominance over the next 10, 20 years.
Yes, but I'm asking about the monetization model of the artist, of the creator, not of the labels. The artists are fairly paid nowadays, or through your vision, how they're going to be fairly paid?
I don't know what the word fair means.
Yes,
personally,
at least
it's a subjective term.
Or to put it, yes, you're right. To put it differently, nowadays definitely they are not paid.
Yeah.
Not fairly, but they're not paid
no,
most of them. Apart
think
if you are not Pharrell or I don't know, you do not even have the access to the channels.
Beyond just not having access to quick flows of money, because right now, look, if you go out there in the lobby and there's music getting played, this hotel is supposed to pay some money towards what we call a performing rights society that collects it and eventually pays it out supposedly to the artist whose music is getting played, or the owners of the copyright, right? That probably takes about 2 years, and it's done by pure arbitrary sampling. It's an antiquated model whose time has come and is way past due. We think that in an era where you can access data about everything, there's no reason that it should take that long to get paid, and you get a check that says 0.03 cents, and you're like, what does this mean? Why am I getting paid this money? So we think we can make it a lot more transparent. Again, I think it will take time. Are artists today getting paid the amount of money that they should be? No, nobody would ever claim that. Do I think that there is a prospect of that happening, especially with the proliferation of music consumption? I think over the next decade we'll see it, but it's still the start. And this is, I think, the promise of a technology like blockchain in terms of what it can do. Because don't forget that music is no longer consumed in its totality. It's also being what I'll call atomized, right? You're seeing unbundling of assets. So it may be a drum loop from here and a guitar lick from over there, and then your daughter may record a vocal and put it up on YouTube, right? Now that is a new piece of work. Who owns that, right? Who is the owner? And especially as we're moving from a professional industry to more and more and more of an amateurization of the industry, similar to what you're seeing in photography, right? About 15, 20 years ago, the bulk of the world's photographs were taken by professionals. I think by some accounts, over 90% of the photographs or 95% of the photographs that exist, even in publications, are taken by amateurs. My feeling is that you will see this in the music industry, but with these new technologies, and especially for me, the impact of blockchain, you can see monetization down the road from people that right now are not monetizing anything. So it can have a trickle-down effect.
Just a little bit back to the reporting here is, this is where we are in blockchain world, the provenance, who owns what, and the reporting out of that. I would like to give an example. ICE, which is the International Copyright Enterprise, which are the Swedish collecting society STIM, the German collecting societies GEMA, and the English collecting societies PRS for Music. They are handling 3.7 trillion lines as of today. And as you said, the value that's printed on one line there is less than the cost of ink and paper is printed on. And they still send it out in a 3 words for a small song. So that obviously has to change because they cannot handle it. That they have reached the ceiling in ICE for a long, long time ago, and they cannot handle it any longer. Now, in my personal view, to have a future, music is also about talent, as photography is about talent and all of that. So there's a big difference between what I call the high earners, or the very popular music and the very popular pictures for that matter, and everybody else that are putting something up on YouTube. But if we don't make it worth their while today and the next decade, as you're saying, we will lose a whole generation of creators. Because, as you said, who here wants to wait 3 years to get paid? Nobody. And that's the reality of today. So what we are trying to do with internet music is basically more money faster. And that is only done by removing all the hands in the cookie jar, which you also were in. And there is a 5-year perspective here and a 25 years perspective to sort all the metadata in the back catalogs out. It's very simple with the popular music because they get paid. But for the 95% out there who are very creative and very talented but haven't really quite made it, they are not earning any money and they have to find something else to do. And we're losing out a whole generation of fantastic music in the process.
So Yanis, in the beginning you talked about adaptation, and now you listen some ideas and some thoughts regarding the evolution of the industry. Are there some lessons, some interesting cases from the markets and industries you have worked the last years that you think it could be as a reference for this adaptation process?
I think so.
Or some ideas?
So I'm listening very intently to the conversation because you guys come from a different industry to mine. I can relate to it because From my angle, I see something which relates to access to assets rather than ownership of assets and the immediacy around it, right? So if you see that, again, if you look at it from my angle, which is more about the industry, manufacturing, or whatever, the supply chain, sale, this is very prevalent. So if I go to technology, specifically hardcore technology as opposed to the industries that it serves, you will see things like we always talk about, like infrastructure as a service, and this as a service, and the other as a service. Now I hear music as a service, and I'm happy to hear that, because this is about accessing an asset, okay? This is IP, is a little bit more convoluted or a little bit more abstract, but nevertheless, if we see it as an asset, this is about immediate access to an asset and paying for it for however long or however you use it, as opposed to owning physically an asset, which may sit at the shelf for 10, 15 years, and then you may come back and use it. So that happens everywhere in technology. That happens, is starting to happen extensively in our lives. It's called Uber. So rather than being, so this whole concept of decentralization and democratization of resources, and it's not just the democratization of resources, but it's about immediacy of access and a much more, I won't say fair, but a much more efficient way of paying for this access, because you don't have to burden yourself with the waste. Because resources are so more evenly distributed and much more accessible, there is much less waste, and therefore the cost also reduces. In terms of adoption, absolutely. So in the music industry, I guess it's called the law, and it's called piracy, and it's called DRM, and everybody's being chased after, and we hear on the internet how people are going to knock on our door and give us fines for copying music. I think I'll be very surprised if anybody in this room doesn't have copied music on their PC or something. I do. Don't tell anyone. But in terms of adoption, so we were talking about this briefly earlier, this whole concept of piracy, which in simple language, piracy is what? It's theft. And if you look at any social group, theft, probably always, if not most of the times, but always, constitutes the exception, not the rule. When that theft becomes the very much prevalent rule, it's at least naive to continue to consider it as theft. It should be understood as a very clear message that the current model just simply doesn't work with your circumstances. And that's what then would point us to the point of adoption. In large corporations, we have to, I do business transformation, for example, and we implement this SAP system and that Oracle system, and we think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then you implement it, and 80% of your workforce don't want to touch it with a barge pole. And that's because you haven't really understood what really works for the group that you're trying to address. And if it doesn't really work for the group that you're trying to address, they will not adopt it. Call it law, call it company regulation, call it CEO directive, and you will be fired if you don't do it. People will still go out of their core applications and use their Excel because it just works better for them.
Great. I would like to give you the floor, adding also where the blockchain fits to this transformation process. Does it start?
Well, first of all, I agree with a lot that Jan is talking about. Like, you have an industry whose fundamental value hasn't declined in terms of cultural value, but its business model is still in the process of adapting to the new realities you were talking about, right? So the reality that it's about access and not ownership, or the reality that you're no longer buying things in bundles, you're buying things in individual pieces. And as I said, we went from albums to songs, and we're going to go from songs to
Ringtones?
This is a Democratic Party wanting a donation from me. That's a different story. In terms of adoption, I think this is the key point. We can talk about technologies all we want, and initiatives, and protocols, and all these abstractions. But at the end of the day, it will require people to adopt something new, both a new way of operating, and a new technology, or anything else. We forget that it took, several decades for the internet to be commercially adopted, and even after it was commercially adopted in the early 90s, it probably took another 15 years before we saw its potential. I'm old enough to have actually started a company during the first wave of the internet. And I started a company at the time where everybody says, that was just a fad that died, because it was 2000, 2001. So I think with respect to blockchain, we'll go through these waves. We're taking a bit of a different approach with respect to the initiative. And I think this is important with respect to strategizing adoption strategies. We're saying that the fundamental problem that the industry has is tying what are really two different types of copyrights, which is what Tor talked about. So there is the song that is owned by the person who wrote it and their publisher, and there is a sound recording, which is what you hear, that is owned usually by the label, okay? There is nothing right now that ties these two entities. So if you are Spotify and you consumed 30 million songs or more, whatever they have in their catalog, you know who gave it to you because it's the person or the entity that owns the recording, but you don't necessarily know for a fact who owns the copyright related to the composition, because a song today could have 8 or 9 or 10 or 15 different collaborators, all of whom owns a piece of it, all of whom can sell it to somebody else, right? Now try and track the money flows. Good luck with it.
Yeah.
So this is why we're having a lot of issues. So we're saying we are starting first with an API that connects sound recording to composition, and it's an open protocol, right? And then from that, we have companies who are blockchain businesses are doing their blockchain implementations on top of that in different ways. But because we're starting with something that everybody agreed on, so we led this team of 200 different companies, a collective of 3,000 hours of work, to come to actually something fairly simple. We said, what is the minimum viable interoperability that we can create across the system? But now, going to the stage of adoption, that is going to be a long process, but we're starting from the point that everybody agrees. Everybody agreed there is a problem connecting sound recording to composition. And we're starting from that one point, so they disagreed on 99.999% of everything else. So we started from this, and then we're building out of that. And our view is if any of the blockchain companies involved create implementations that enable the efficient tracking of ownership across the entire supply chain of music, then it's up to them to go and sell it. Because at the end of the day, I'm a free marketer. I believe that open markets determine standards more so than mandated top-down standards, which have been many, but have never taken hold precisely because of adoption issues.
Tor.
I agree with you in a lot of those, but I think it could be much, much simpler. As I said, we are only doing this from a digital point of view. And the complexity of everything else is enormous. But it's possible to do digitalized much, much simpler. So basically what we are basing all of this is in a funny sort of way, a very commercial model, the stock market. And the cryptocurrency incentive in this is the liquidity of a stock in the stock market. And that is exactly the same that is happening in a creator, as in musical works, that is the creator and not the artist, and in the recording. There are shares in that particular creative musical works and shares in a recording. And by regulating that in the same way a stock market is regulated today, we will in effect remove that big black box to the cookie jar, if you like. Now, the only way of doing that efficiently in a almost real time, and in the music industry, real time is within a couple of days compared to a couple of years, is by using a technology that hasn't been available before, blockchain, and using the tokenized approach in blockchain for representing the shares, and using a cryptocurrency that are the payment, a dividend if you like, which in our word is royalties, payment into those shares. And that is already in existence. So it's easy to adapt. But what you have to have is the consent of the owners of that copyright, both in musical works and recordings. When you have that, you also have the potential or the basis for a music as a service, so anybody can hook into this and pay as you go or pay monthly or whatever for a limited licensing. That is 3.5-minute license, the time it takes to stream a song. And I believe to simplify the process, which we can do in the digital world, we couldn't do in a scenario like the music you hear here. They have to report it. You are able to create a total new ecosystem for what we call more money faster to the creators of music.
Okay, look, since we do not disagree a lot, and this is not very...
We could disagree, but we don't have enough time for it.
I would like to engage the audience a bit earlier than scheduled. I would like to have some of your questions, some of your needs, some of your thoughts around these. I don't know.
And I'm hoping that the audience doesn't, we're talking about music, but just abstract it, because these issues that we're talking about are prevalent in just about any industry. I mean, since we started the initiative, we've had philanthropy organizations come to us, like the Gates Foundation. We've had the autonomous car industry come to us, like the Toyota Research Foundation. We've had healthcare records companies come to us, precisely because issues of who owns data and how do you share it, and how do you authenticate all this information, and how do you expedite payment flows are universal. So I know we're talking about music, but it could be frankly anything.
I have to be very careful to focus on music, actually.
Yeah. Can we pass the microphone to if there are some, yes. So is there any question?
We have time for one quick question and we have to wrap up the session.
I think we have 3 minutes and 8 seconds according to this.
Yeah.
I'll try to be fast actually. So we see that the blockchain can be the depository for the new type of ownership structures, right? So do you believe that that when what would win? So when you have the new music creative and you register it on the blockchain from the very beginning, or you still can tokenize the old existing kind of 180 million music pieces. So it's like a new technology will only work for the new songs, or it will also you can actually put the old songs to the blockchain.
So what we're doing, the approach is that it's an open API. So ultimately, actually, we're focusing on that because the bulk of the commercial music industry today that you are listening to comes from 3 labels and from a handful of publishers. So we are starting by saying, look, it is up to these participants to implement the API or to comply to the open API. Universal, which is the world's largest record label, is one of the most active participants. So it's all about an issue of propagating with data. So our view is actually you can go backwards, but going forwards would be a lot easier because you can create a lot of new ways of capturing data through watermarking and other things that simply did not exist in the past. So to Thor's point, I actually feel that it's not that difficult to capture music that's getting played live somewhere because everybody has an application called Shazam that's already doing that. You just need to tie Shazam to the metadata related to that song, and boom, you have a new payment, right? That's not happening. This is why we're taking the approach of create an open protocol that people are complying to, and then that effectively acts as the traffic cop of data. What implementations are being put on top of it? It could be Thor's company, it could be anything for as far as we care.
There's also, one of the biggest problems is the back catalogs, where the metadata is all over the place. And you cannot change already entered legal agreements. That if an artist or a creator made a bad deal 10 years ago, you cannot change that. But as you said, you can go forward and change it by inviting and get the new creators in to a new system, whether that is our system or an open music initiative, which probably will be both, because we will be use everything, technology and every possible partnership out there to sort this out. It's not something, and there is 0.00. But it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time.
But we need you guys. How about this? We need young, I don't know if they're young, we just need fresh ideas of entrepreneurs to come into this ecosystem. I mean, if you don't have investment and if you don't have entrepreneurialism in any industry, it will just die. And that's what the industry lacked. It's a permission-based industry. We want to make it permissionless, if you will, to innovate. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.